Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. I'm going to go ahead and start the rebuild on the shocks. It looks like these shocks, the springs are the same size diameter as 8th scale springs. I'm not 100% sure, but they certainly look that size, so I'll be measuring that out and letting you know. That would make a wide variety of spring options available if that is the case. And I'll be letting you know what fluids I'm using. I'm gonna kind of figure out what I want to use there. Basically, I'm probably gonna look on a couple of different other vehicles of the same size and class and see what they are running in theirs, and kind of pick a baseline to start from and go forward from there. I may try running a pair of 4 cells at some point, not immediately. I'm going to work with what came with the car, which is a pair of 5,000 milliamp batteries. They're fairly low C rating at only 35. I did a little looking online, and I saw some batteries, you know, with 100 or higher C rating, something that would give some nice punch. We've only got adjustments for tow at the rear here. We've got a pair of pills, and you can basically flip them, so you could have both of them outboard, which would extend the track, both of them inboard, which would extend the track, or you can have one inboard, one outboard, and that's going to give you some tow one direction or the other. Probably going to leave the stock setup. It's too bad they don't give us a pair of that have the hole in the center. That way we could adjust that toe a little bit, but such as it is. After all, this isn't a race car. It's not going to qualify for any of the race classes at 7th scale. So this is just a basher. I hate that term, but it's just going to be a fun car to go out and jam around with. Really looking forward to that first snow, because this looks like it's going to just be a ton of fun for general RC. The things I like about this right off the bat is the size of it. It's not going to be able to run through super high grass, but you know, even if the lawn hadn't been cut in a few weeks, it's still going to blast right through. It's going to handle mud, it's going to handle loose dirt. It's pretty much going to go through almost anything that you've got as far as terrain and not get stuck all the time. You know, for example, a 10th scale buggy, you can't do anything with those outside of a groomed track or some type of area that is dirt. Any kind of grass of any height, and they just get stuck, and it's no fun. This is something that is just going to be a blast. It's going to go up curbs. It's going to, you know, go over small logs. It's going to jump real nice. It's going to pretty much, it should pretty much go through anything within reason. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what it's capable of. So I'm going to dive back in here and continue getting this taken apart so we can see where things are at. Make sure that our diffs have lube, put in a decent fluid, and get the shocks rebuilt. I don't expect there's going to be many issues. Everything that I've seen so far looks pretty high quality and looks like it was well thought out. I really liked the predecessor, the DBX-10, and still am working on that car and enjoying it. It's a lot of fun. I think this is maybe a step above in overall quality. That's just my initial view. I'm looking forward to seeing what can be done with this brake as far as adjustments and you know, setting up either the front or the rear to brake more than the other, and how that's going to affect handling. Okay, I definitely recommend rebuilding the shock absorbers. I've taken off the springs and kind of checked to see how the damping works, and I opened one of the shocks. It seemed like it was low on fluid. Let me see if I can get this so you can kind of see it or hear it. Okay, right about here, it's like it breaks through something and the piston moves much more easily to the top of the stroke, like it's reached the end of the fluid. Not exactly sure. I'm going to need to open these up, examine the pistons, see what's going on. I hope I've got some. Anyway, we'll see what's going on. I have no idea. So let's start with that. One of the other shocks, let me also see if I can demonstrate this. I mean, they give us very nice boots here. Supposedly there are a pair of seals in here separated by a spacer. Let's hope that's the case. This one, it breaks through right about there and like halfway through the stroke, and there's almost no resistance right here. I don't know if it's just half full of fluid or what's going on there, but it's behaving very strangely, and it shouldn't do that. So, you know, maybe these, they don't have any leakage from the factory. The only place they would leak would be at the seals down here, and there's no evidence of any shock fluid inside these boots. So I'm not sure where it's coming from, but there's definitely a problem. You're going to want to have a wrench handy. These caps are on pretty tight, and they did put O-rings in the preload adjusters. Unlike the DBX-10, my DBX-10 did not have O-rings in the grooves inside these. Whoever assembled it either left them out, or I don't know, but they were not there. These not only seem to fit better and are properly, you know, the threads are the right size for each of the two components, but they have the O-rings. There is, as you can see, a wrench fitting here. The top is a hex, so you're going to want to have a crescent wrench to be able to get onto there, and that way you can loosen the cap. You'll also want to tighten it the same way, because you want to make sure it's completely tight. So it looks like we got a decent set of shocks. I also took off one of these fittings, and there was a little bit of residue. I think these are actual bleed screws. If they are, I may build these as emulsion and leave the bladders out. I've never been a huge fan of the bladders. I find that it's harder to get a consistent build with those, and maybe it's just what I've been used to over you know, decades of building these shocks. Do you find these videos to be helpful, useful to you? Then please help me keep this channel going by donating. Click the link up here and you can donate safely through PayPal on either a one-time or a monthly basis, your choice. So next thing is what weights of fluid. Now, I looked at a handful of different vehicles that are in the range of this kind of size. I looked at two 1/5 scale cars, the Losi 1/5 Desert Buggy and the Armour Creighton 8S 1/5 scale, and then I also looked at the 8 XTE, which is a Losi or a TLR 8th scale 4-wheel drive truggy. It's a race truck, not a in the basher class, which these two are. So for the 8th scale truck, for shocks, they recommend 37 in the front, 32 in the rear for shock weight. And that's what I've decided to go with. The Creighton has 500 CST in front and rear, and the Desert Buggy has 40-pound weight front and rear. Now, the 1/5s are considerably larger, so I'm not surprised that it's they're going a little heavier here on this Losi versus this, because these are both made by the same company-ish. Losi and TLR are the same parent company, but they're TLR is the race division, I guess. In any event, I'm going with the 37-pound and the 32-pound. Now, the differentials, there's a wide range of difference here. On the Arrma Creighton, they've got 1 million weight diff fluid in the center diff, 500,000 in the front and the rear. And in the Losi 1/5 scale, they've got 30,000 front and rear and 50,000 in the center diff. Now, if you go down to the 1/8 scale, you've got 7,000 front, 5,000 rear, and 1,250 in the center. Now, these, again, are bashers, and that explains the considerably higher amount of viscosity they're using. They're trying to really lock these diffs down and limit the amount of slippage so that the vehicle is going to be a little easier to drive. The lighter weights here, lightest in the rear diff, that's going to make the rear a little harder to handle. It's going to be looser, but at the same time, it's going to make it easier to turn. Whereas these are set up to run a straight line really well, really stable, without trying to get away from you. So I'm kind of going in, I'm kind of splitting the difference on the two philosophies. I'm going to go 15,000 in the front, I'm going to go 30,000 in the center, and I'm going to go 12,500 in the rear. It's locked down a little tighter than the A scale, and the 8th scale and this 7th scale are still really close to each other. This definitely has bigger wheels and tires, but the overall dimensions as far as wheelbase and wheel track are not that different. It's got a much bigger motor, and it's running higher cell number than an 8th scale race vehicle would be, but I want this thing to be able to turn well. At the same time, I do want it to be able to hold a straight line reasonably well. That's why I'm going, you know, with the 30,000 in the center. I want the power to go to both ends well without it, you know, going much more to one or much more to the other. The thicker, remember, the thicker the viscosity, the more this acts like a locker versus a free differential. And likewise, again, in the front, again, a thicker front, it's going to help make the front track better. It's going to pull better from the front. So, again, this is, to a certain degree, I'm throwing darts at a board, but this is my guesstimation on a good starting setup for this vehicle, and we'll see how that pans out. So I'm going to set these aside for now. I don't need those until I get to the differentials. Right now I'm working on shocks. The reason I've got 4 bottles out here is because this bottle of 37.5 is pretty low, and this big one is brand new, so I'm going to finish off this. And it's the same situation with my 32.5 for the rear. This one's almost empty, and this is brand new. These shocks are very large, and they're going to take a lot of fluid, so that's why I'm got the extra bottles out. So I have started taking these apart. I'm going to go ahead and do them a pair at a time. That way I don't get things mixed up. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little more difficult because the shock stand that I have, these don't sink through. Even the cap here doesn't go through even the larger holes. Well, it does the first hole, so that will stand it up. So I should be okay. I'm not going to have to hold it in my hand all that time while I wait for the bubbles to come out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the disassembly on these, and I will show you the relevant inside parts as this goes along, and anything I come across that is a problem or of benefit for us, or any tricks you need to know. It's really nice to have these boots. It's going to make maintenance and cleanup easier. It's one less thing to worry about, getting dirt into the shock seals. One of the problems identified and something peculiar found. First off, the pistons are a problem. They are really cheap, and I'm just not a fan for a variety of reasons. Fortunately, I have pistons that will fit. Now, I've only got one set of 4, so I don't have any choices as far as hole count and hole size, so I'll have to just kind of go with this and hope the fluid works well with this piston. I may need to change the fluid later, but this is where I'm going to start. These are from a Kyosho Inferno MP10E, so in 1/8 scale buggy, and they are just the right size for our shock body, and they also have a hole that is the right size to fit our shock shaft. You can also use pistons from a Techno SCT 410.3 or 410.2 or the original 410. Those are all available. You can order them from almost any hobby place. Most 1/8 scale shocks are gonna work. Shock parts and pistons are gonna work. The difference is the inner diameter of the hole for the shock shaft. I tried a set from a Serpent 1/8 scale GT car that has a larger diameter shaft, or the threaded portion is larger, and so those are too loose, will not work. But as I mentioned, the Kyosho Inferno MP10E or the MP9E will work fine, and the Techno SCT 410 series, any of their pistons are going to work just fine. And so that is what I would recommend doing, is getting a set of those. It's a cheap fix, probably $5 or $8 max. Now, the next thing I found is something different from the diagram. In the diagram, the exploded view, they show, and I'm going to pull this up for you. On page 6, this is our first exploded view, and in this area here, we can see our inner shock. Hopefully this is clear. Okay, we have our cap, we have a insert at the top of the cap, which is going to be hard plastic, an O-ring, a spacer, and an O-ring. In mine, not only does this piece look different, but there's no spacer, just a pair of O-rings. So I may need to come up with a spacer of my own. Here's what they have in place of that first insert, is this piece, and it looks like it's 2 pieces built in one. The way it is inserted is like this, but I'm not sure that that is gonna work properly, because unless, I mean, you really don't want 2 O-rings one up against another. That just It's not the way it's supposed to be done. They're supposed to have a flat surface on either side of them to press them equally so that they expand and create a seal. So I'm going to experiment and see what I come up with. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drain this shock, and I'm going to continue the process, and I will let you know, of course, where things go. I spec'd out a rebuild kit that's fairly inexpensive. It's basically all the Delrin parts for a set of 1/8 scale shocks. I'm not going to give you parts or names or numbers until I get those here and test them. So for the moment, I'm going to set the shocks aside. I'm going to start doing the rest of the disassembly and rebuilding the differentials. And I've also got another set of pistons coming as well. So hopefully those internals will fit and I can replace everything here, and we'll have a nice set of shocks that are properly sealed. So I'll cover all of that in detail, and if the parts fit, I will give you those part numbers so you can order a set for your car. Okay, I got some parts in. I'm going to be using some Techno and excuse me, possibly some X-ray parts. Depends on what's going to fit. The pistons are absolutely going to fit. The pistons are TKR6169. It's a flat piston. I'll just show you one up close. So I went with something with slightly smaller holes than the pistons I was looking at earlier, the ones that I already had for a different vehicle, and that's because I want to have more pack. Smaller holes will give more pack. Pack is the faster the piston is compressed, at some point it hits a level, and it's kind of a combination of the holes and the thickness or viscosity of the shock fluid where it almost stops and or it dramatically slows down, and that's what you're looking for under certain kinds of conditions. If you've got a very bumpy track, you want less pack because you want the suspension to be able to undulate and manage the bumps. If you're on a smoother surface or you're hitting really big jumps, you want a little bit more pack. That way the shock isn't just bottoming out. You want it to ideally slow down before it bottoms out, and hopefully not completely bottom out. So you know, that's always a moving target because, you know, every jump you take is different depending on how fast you're going, how much height you get, etc., etc., etc. So I'm kind of throwing a dart at a board here, but I wanted to go with a flat piston instead of a concave or piston because I wanted there to be more of an edge, since these might be a little loose due to less critical tolerances, and so I wanted the piston to have a good surface. In any event, they're machined pistons, they're very accurate, so that's where I'm going with those. Now, these parts, inner parts here, are not what is shown. They've got this big inner piece here that is not in the drawing, and we've got two O-rings, one directly following the next, and there should be a spacer in between these O-rings, but there isn't. And because of how tall this piece is, you can't fit a spacer in there. Now, if I flip this upside down, so the taller piece protrudes through like so, I should have room for a small spacer in between the two O-rings. Should. Or I may need to go with one of these pieces in these two different shock kits. Now, both of these shock spacer kits, they run between $5 and $10, depending on manufacturer, and they come with spacers and the end piece. Now, some of these may not work well with this because of the size of this aperture. It's not a standard, but the O-rings are pretty much a standard for this size shock absorber, which is 1/8 scale vehicles. So I'm gonna see which sets of these work, and I'm gonna start with the Technos and see if I can come up with a configuration that isn't gonna over compress the O-rings. So, because if the O-rings are squeezed too tight, the piston isn't gonna want to move. It'll seal very well, but the shock shaft will be very stiff, and that's not gonna work for us. On the other hand, if it's too loose, we end up with the opposite. It moves well, but we leak fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of do several different tests and see what works as far as the shock shaft moving and yet being snug enough that I shouldn't have to worry about leakage, and we'll see what works. And then I will let you know which parts work, and then you can order those for your car. I definitely recommend doing this because having two round, I mean, that these seals, the O-rings, it's like a donut. It's round, and when you have a round item pressing against a round item, they're not going to flatten out levelly. They're gonna, one might squish to one side while one pushes the other direction, like this, or like that. They're not going to stay face to face and spread out into a nice ellipse and thus press against the outer edge and press inward against the shock shaft, creating a seal. So we're not going to have a consistent seal going on there. So that's why you're supposed to have a spacer in between the O-rings. And in their exploded view, as I showed you earlier, they show a spacer there. And every shock absorber I've ever built that has dual O-rings, there is a spacer in between those O-rings. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here, is a proper setup. So this has nothing to do with tuning as much as making the shocks function reliably and sealing well. Okay, so I've come up with a solution that I think works. It's smooth, it moves easy, and I'm not getting any leakage, at least so far, with you know, working the shock multiple times and not being able to produce any leakage. So I've put two together. On the last two, actually specifically I'm on the last one. One of them's almost done. So I'm going to show you what I did and tell you what I got. Okay, I got a shock cartridge set, part number TKR 6146. This is for Techno 1/8 scale shocks. Now, I am also using the a set of Techno O-rings, shock O-rings. I already had these. I know that they are Techno, even though they're in an unmarked bag, because they were in my Techno parts box. So the only reason they would be in there is if I had ordered spares, which I do for most of the cars that I race. So I'm not a big fan of these stock O-rings. They feel really hard. They feel more like plastic than silicone versus the ones that the Techno ones, which are definitely a silicone product. So here's the assembly. One O-ring, generously coated with O-ring conditioner. One plastic spacer. It's flat on both sides of the, is there an old part in there? Hang on a second. Of the Techno parts that come in that set, there are 3 pieces. 2 of them I am using. 2 of them I'm using, 1 of them I'm not. There's an inner spacer with a lip on it, and it looks like this. Hopefully you can see that it's got a raised edge. Okay, so I am using the large piece that would go for the cap, and I am using the spacer. So O-ring, spacer, O-ring. The end cap, and then I screw on the cap. I leave it loose, which is the way you should do with any shock build. Push the shock shaft through with the Techno piston. Get the excess shock lube off there, the O-ring lubricant. And then, holding the shock body with a standard crescent wrench, I tighten the cap. And now we have a nice, smooth operating shock. There's no binding. It moves nice and cleanly through the O-rings, but so far, with multiple exercising of the shocks, fully filled with fluid, there is no leakage. So, fill them up, bleed them, put them together as you would any normal shock that has a bladder in the cap. Wait for the bubbles to come out. And then you put your cap on with the bladder in place, pressure bleed it. In other words, you start to tighten it, the cap down, you raise the piston to start pressing the fluid up against the cap. Excess is going to leak out the sides, and then tighten the cap down all the way. If you have too much rebound, or if the shock won't collapse fully, that means it's over pressurized, so you need to loosen the cap, press the shock shaft almost all the way up, loosen the cap until some fluid and or bubbles seeps out, and then retighten the cap. That's all there is to it. It's a nice, easy process. In fact, I'm about to do it with this one, so I'll go ahead and show you. One of the reasons I'm not a big fan of bladders is because this can be a really messy process. So now I am compressing the shock most of the way. Ease the cap back a little bit and fluid runs out. And then tighten the shock. Definitely have some paper towels or extra towels handy. Okay, it's got a little much in the way of pressure, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen the cap back up, press down on the shock, keep loosening the cap until you get some bleed through, and then tighten the cap. You'll get a little bit of fluid out. Clean it off again, and then test. And that's pretty good. A little bit of rebound is fine, especially for the fronts, but we've got a nice action going here. There's no leakage. I think that's still a little heavy on the rebound. I'm going to do this one more time. And you can do this as much as you need to, and if you go too far, just add more fluid and take another crack at it. Okay, still got a teeny bit of rebound, but I think that's decent. I'm happy with that. Shock works great. Really good damping. So now I'm going to do a final tighten. There we go. Sealed shock. Now I can put the preload adjuster all the way to the top, put the spring on, well, eyelet, boot. I'll just show you. It's quick and easy. Boot before eyelet. Stretch the boot over top so the edge drops in. It's got a little ring around the top that'll drop in behind the cap. Slide the boot out of the way. I'm not doing a precise measurement, I'm just tightening these things right down to the top of the threaded area. Put on the spring. Pull the boot down. Put on the spring cup, and we have one front shock fully assembled. Good to go. Okay, I took parts of the front end apart, and there was plenty of grease on the ring and pinion. The differential is nice and smooth. There's no cogging. I checked the rear one. No cogging back there. Center seems good. To get to this center diff, you've pretty much got to take this entire assembly, including the motor, off, because it loads from beneath, not above. And that means taking apart the brakes that are on either side here. You got to take the entire front end off and then disassemble a lot of this, including the arms. There's no quick access to the diffs, unfortunately. And same kind of situation in the rear. A lot of this stuff has to come off, arms, etc. So since everything was greased and everything is turning smoothly, I've decided to wait on rebuilding the diffs until I've gotten this thing nice and mucked up and I want to do a full service on it. Shocks are rebuilt, so I'm just gonna not know what diff fluids I've got. But I'll be tinkering with the brakes and seeing how that works. I did, while I was in here, since I had the front assembly off and I had the steering assembly off, there's bearings on most things. The steering seems to be the only thing that doesn't have bearings on it. It has these bushings. These are 10 by 6 by 3. Okay, 10 is the outer diameter, 6 is the inner diameter, and 3 is the height. It's a common bearing size. I actually had a set of 4 10 by 6 by 3s. They were probably wheel bearings from another kit that I had upgraded to ceramic bearings. So I took these steel bearings and put them in the steering assembly, and the steering assembly is like butter. It's great. I don't know what it was like beforehand because I didn't test it. You know, with just to see what the bushings were like. So I didn't even know there were bushings to test. So if you either have or want to buy yourself 4 10 by 6 by 3 ball bearings, I'd recommend getting the rubber sealed type. Those are probably a little more resistant to water and mud. I'd go ahead and swap those. It's a fairly easy process. So what I'm going to do now is reassemble and put on the shocks, and I'm going to do some tuning. It seems to have a lot of droop, or it has very little droop would be more appropriate. The ride height screws are really cranked down. They don't appear to be even either. So I'm going to put this on a setup board, and I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to show you step by step how I'm going to do a base setup on the suspension and adjust, you know, ride height and things like that, and put the shocks on. I'm going to go with the stock springs and get it out and do some driving as soon as possible. So I figured that would be more entertaining for this first set of videos than worrying about the diff, since, like I said, everything appears to be well lubricated and everything runs smooth. So it's not like the DBX-10 where there was a lot of chomping and the diffs were a little tight and really needed a rebuild, and some shims changed. Anyway, everything's good. So instead of stripping the entire car bare almost, I wanted to get it out and drive it and get some driving impressions as soon as possible, and then later I'll go into the full disassembly. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel. If you click the bell icon, you'll receive notifications every time I launch a new video. Thank you for watching.